the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to thee, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So by the time that the person who wrote Matthew's gospel, who we will call Matthew, it probably wasn't the disciple Matthew, because it was 2 generations after the disciples were following Jesus, after Jesus died. This little group of Christians who followed this terrific storyteller who was able to convey the love and energy of Jesus with the story of the disciples following Jesus. This little band of Christians had gone through a really rough time. And when Matthew sat down to write this gospel, he not only told what happened with Jesus and the disciples, he had little hints in there showing the people who were there with them today how they could be a Christian, how God was taking care of everything, how they didn't need to worry. Just keep being who you are, and God will take care of you. Now, it's not abundantly clear when you read this lesson that there is any good news in it. Did anybody else say, where's the good news in this? It's a little dreary. First, nobody comes, and then we have the familiar story of the king sending more slaves, and they're not treated well. And then the king sends an army and destroys the city, and he's enraged, and there's this anger everywhere. And then we have the guy with the wrong clothes who gets thrown into the outer darkness at the wedding. It's not easy to find the good news. But if you know the context in which it is being told, there is good news. So, again, we have a hard parable to kind of ferret around in. Let's see what's going on. By the time that this gospel was written, Jerusalem had fallen. And it didn't fall gently like a tree in a wood. It was destroyed by the Roman army. Before this happened, however, these young Christians, the new followers of Jesus, were sure that the resurrection was the beginning of the end, that God was coming to gather them together to go to the wedding feast and be with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all of the prophets and all of the saints, and dance and have a wedding. And it did not happen. And they saw some of their own family chased down, hunted, and killed. They were martyrs because they proclaimed that Jesus was the Messiah. Now, this little group of people around Matthew were all Jewish Christians or Christian Jews. So they looked at the people that were in the synagogue who were not liking what they said. They looked at them as their family. And their family was slamming the door in their face, saying, you may not come into this synagogue if you say that Jesus is the Messiah. They were being kicked out of the places that they thought God lived in. And they wanted to come in, but the door was slammed. And then they started to be killed. So when they remember this story that Jesus told, this parable, and they hear that the first slaves are rejected, they think of those as the Hebrew or Jewish prophets. They go, yeah, they were rejected. They were killed. That did happen. And it makes them feel a little better. Then they hear in the next stage that their Christian brothers and sisters and family that had been, some of them crucified, some of them killed, some of them rejected and hurt. They know that they have an encouragement in their story when they hear that, yes, this all happened because God was doing it, that they were necessary to be martyred. It's not really good news, but they feel some lift of the spirit knowing this is all part of the story. And then at the end, they know that God is going to make it all well, that he's going to invite the good and the bad. That means everybody, the riffraff. He invites all of them to the wedding banquet, good and bad, and they're going to dance, and they're going to eat, and they're going to be with everybody, and they find the promise here comforting. So what's comforting about throwing out the guy with no wedding jacket? That one's hard, but there is a little bit of a story to this. In this culture, when you went to a wedding, you were provided a white robe to put on. The white robe signified that you had an inner conversion, that you were there to rejoice with God that this couple was getting married, that you are there heart and soul, and the white robe is symbolism for how your heart is turned within, to be present, to feast with God, to party with God, and to dance and drink wine until the morning. So, when one person blatantly refuses to put that wedding garment on, he is thumbing his nose at the host. And who's the host? God. God or Jesus. Either one. What happens at this banquet, picture that everybody at the wedding banquet is now seated at the table, in between the dancing. They have this sumptuous feast prepared for them, and they're eating. When the king comes in, and the king doesn't sit down at the table with them, he meanders all the way around the table, looking at his guests, so pleased that they have all done this inner conversion and are celebrating and rejoicing. In the midst of all their troubles, they're having a wedding banquet. And then he sees Mr. Stink Eye, who came in not only without the wedding garment, but he is letting his evil eye permeate everybody at the feast, criticizing them with his presence, being an affront to their senses. And so they're encouraged when they hear this parable about him being thrown into the outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. And that sounds just like a comic strip, right? When the kids and I were on the train yesterday going to Manhattan, to the cathedral, there was a comic strip extravaganza that was happening in downtown Manhattan. And we saw these costumes and cartoon characters on the train. And this reads like a cartoon. Weeping and gnashing of teeth in the outer darkness. Oh my, lions and tigers and bears. And it's supposed to be a little funny. You can laugh at this. Because what happens in the outer darkness? You feel lonely. You miss your people. You don't like being out there. Would you like weeping and gnashing in the outer darkness? No. So you ask for forgiveness. You come back into the fold. And that's what the outer darkness was meant for. Not to be over there forever. Not final judgment. You notice it never says that. This is a communal society. Everything that's done is done to attract you to the good. And that's what this king has done. He said, but I baked my fatty calf, and I'm going to have that big old rooster that was so fat, and we're going to have succulent olives and wine. And why don't you want to come? You can almost hear the whining. Why don't you want to come to my party? God wants us to look at the Eucharist as that feast, where we're going to put away our troubles, forget any resentments that we may be harboring inside, let everything go, put on our party shoes, drink the wine, eat the bread, and celebrate that we're part of this festival that's happening in heaven. We are at the wedding banquet every time we come up to this altar. And those of us who hear this story, even though we are not persecuted and we haven't seen our friends die the martyr's death, we do have this personal spiritual direction that we're supposed to be following, right? And we know that this community called ourselves, there's always this loudmouth that says the wrong thing at the exact wrong time, that hurts somebody's feelings, that holds on to resentments, that doesn't know how to let go, and is very controlling. I know this from personal experience. We have to let all of that go when we come to the altar. And Matthew is the best gospel writer to say this again and again and again. Please, when you come to the wedding banquet, forget it all. Forgive anybody you have a resentment against. Forgive them. And if you haven't, leave. Go out there into the outer darkness. Say, I'm sorry, and come back as quickly as possible. Because we want you here. We want you at the altar feeling lifted up with no cares in the world, knowing that God forgives you, knowing that your job is now to party, to drink the wine and eat the bread and put on your red shoes and have a really good time. So take heart. These parables are meant for us to do that hard work, which you have to do sometimes, to be able to go to the wedding and really party hardy. Amen.